All right, everybody. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome coast to coast to coast across Canada for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Jesse. I'm your virtual adventure guide, and what we are all about is bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, everything we do goes live to YouTube and stays there forever. So if you want to see this program or like almost 3,000 others over our last 7 years, you can head to our YouTube channel when you're done this program and check out both more programs in Banff and many, many more. Today's program is a continuation of our Epic Peak Discovery series. So all year long, we've had the thrill and pleasure of partnering with the amazing mountain parks in Alberta and British Columbia. These are not just treasures and gems of Canada's national park system, but really are some of the most amazing places on planet Earth. We've had the chance to feature stories of Park Patrol, how they make sure that park habitats stay safe from people who might want to exploit them. We've learned about bats, we've learned about bears, we've learned about bison. No lions and tigers, though. We don't have those in Canada. It has been just a ceaseless thrill to get to bring you these stories. And we've got one more program for you coming next week, Guardians of the Grasslands, to wrap up our incredible series. So do check that out if you get the chance. Now, before I introduce today's topic, I do want to note we have a Kahoot today. So if you're live with us on StreamYard, if you're one of our many classes, basically all of Alberta signed up for this program. So if you're one of our classes on YouTube, join in with this Kahoot pin. I'll be doing this between the talk and Q&A. So we've got about 20 minutes to wait before our Kahoot, but it's an extra fun way to be a little interactive today. Now, I'm thrilled to welcome back the amazing team at Banff National Park for the very last time this year. It's kind of bittersweet. Banff was the very first park to partner with us several years ago as we got underway with these incredible park series. And I'm so thrilled to welcome them back for a topic today close to my own heart, blazing trails. So we're going to mix a little bit about using fire and wildlife corridor creation to tell a really cool story of how we keep the ecosystem in Banff National Park healthy for all. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome in Steve. Thank you so much for joining us today in Banff, and I'm so excited to dive in with this topic. Steve, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks so much. Hello. Good morning, everyone. And bonjour tout le monde. So as Jesse said, we are going to find out about fire management, and a special project in one of the wildlife corridors here right near the town of Banff. So I will make sure that there's plenty of time later on to have the chat, just the way Jesse said, so you can ask some personal questions too. Let's launch right in. So the first question is one that I get to ask. Can any of you find Banff National Park on this map? All right, let's see. First, though, if you can find the province of Alberta. Point at it now if you know where Alberta is. Okay. They got it? If you're pointing at the bit that turned green, you are correct. Good. So that's Alberta, and the green dot represents the city of Calgary. Now, Banff National Park is about an hour-and-a-half drive from Calgary's International Airport. Over 4 million people visit us every year. So we can face big challenges balancing human use of the park with nature conservation. There's a long cultural history here as well. And we acknowledge that Banff National Park is within the present-day territories of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, as well as the Métis homeland. The lands and waters of Banff have been used for millennia by Indigenous peoples for sustenance, ceremony, trade, and travel. We thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us. Now today, Banff National Park is in the care of Parks Canada. That's the government agency that looks after our country's national and cultural heritage. So let me know in the chat if you have ever visited a national park, a national historic site, or a marine conservation area. You'll recognize Parks Canada places when you see this beaver logo. Yeah, anyone been to any of the places where you are nearby?
I know we've got a lot of folks in the Alberta area right near you guys. I'm expecting a lot of Banff. Miss Doyle's chiming in with Banff. YouTubers, feel free to chime in there too. Banff was actually the first national park that I visited. Jasper for Miss Doyle's class as well. Waterton. Holy, Miss Doyle's been to all our mountain parks. She could just do the hosting for these programs in the future. Anyone else want to chime in? We'd love to hear from you in the chat. But it's fantastic to hear that there's a bunch of you that have been there.
Great. Okay, well, wherever you are across the country, at Parks Canada, we protect all those historic sites, landscapes, animals, and plants now and for future generations. And we have the privilege to share the stories of these special places with you. Okay, now one of the principles that guides our work here at Parks Canada is called ecological integrity. That means that an ecosystem that is healthy and whole is being maintained. We try to make sure that both the living and non-living parts of our parks are all there, along with all the processes that they need. For example, in Canada's Rocky Mountains, some of the non-living parts of this ecosystem are rocks, glaciers, wind, water, sunshine. We can see living parts of the ecosystem all around, like plants, animals, fungi, and even bacteria that we can't see. And tying all of this together are the processes of life, birth, growth, reproduction, death, and decay, as well as non-biological processes like seasons, avalanches, floods, and fires. And when all of these things are in balance, we call it ecological integrity. Now, fire is one of the things that makes Banff National Park whole and healthy. Parks Canada is actually lighting fires to improve habitat in wildlife corridors. Today, we will explore how these three things work together: fire, habitat, and wildlife corridors. And I will show you how we brought all of those ideas together in the Cascade Corridor Fire Project. So let's look at fire first. I'm going to put on a video clip of a fire for a moment. And while that's playing, could you tell me in the chat what comes to your mind when you think about forest fires? Maybe a write or two to describe it as you watch this little clip. Aha. Yes. Danger. Yes. Smoke comes from fire. Ooh, dead stuff. Yeah, dead stuff burns quicker than live or green wood. California. Wow. Australia. Yeah. Fire has had a big impact and it's on our minds. Absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. So yes, as we see, fire can be a huge source of destruction, but it can also recycle nutrients and actually can make forests healthier. Wildfires are a part of a natural cycle, kind of like Mother Nature doing a spring cleaning every century or so. Nature never stands still. In order to be a healthy, a forest needs diversity. So different types and ages of trees, as well as different types and ages of other plants. Fire clears away the underbrush, dry grasses, dead and diseased trees, and turns all of that into ash to feed new plants. Now, often fire will consume patches of the forest, leaving other parts untouched. This mosaic effect, like you can see here, creates the diversity that a healthy forest community needs. When the thick canopy of trees burns away, it allows sunlight to hit the forest floor again, and in turn, this makes better growing conditions for the plants that provide food for wildlife. So we know that while fire is destructive, it can also be healthy and helpful. So this is a photo of Banff's Bow Valley just 100 years ago. We can see that the valley bottoms are very bare and there don't seem to be a lot of trees. Now fast forward to this next photo. Just a second. There, and you can see the same place in 1985 that you can see, and you can see how the valley is filled up with thick forest. So up until the 1980s, park managers almost eliminated fire from this landscape by putting out any fires as quickly as possible. And because of that, the park became cluttered with trees that were reaching the end of their natural lifespan. Diversity was hard to find when large forests are packed with tightly with old trees or dead trees. That's a lot of stuff just waiting to burn. Now, with all of that fuel lying around, the risk of severe wildfires goes way up. Huge, out-of-control fires can cause massive damage to human and forest communities. And around the 1980s, Parks Canada ecologists started to see the danger of keeping fire out of Banff National Park for so long. Forests were losing diversity, and our ecological integrity was at risk. So they looked at carefully putting fire back in. They looked at the history in this area and listened to the oral history of local Indigenous groups to discover that people had always used fire as a role in the Bow Valley. Indigenous hunters knew that burned areas attracted wildlife, so they'd been using fire as a hunting tool for thousands of years, and that the ecology of this place was adapted to that regular fire cycle. Park ecologists developed a plan to burn sections of the park bit by bit to restore the natural role of fire in a careful, controlled way. This is called prescribed fire, because just like a doctor gives you a prescription for medicine to heal you, fire and forestry experts prescribe fire for the health of our forests. Now, a word of caution here, friends. Don't try this at home. While we are talking about fire and the benefits, we have to remember that prescribed fires are lit by experts with special equipment under carefully controlled conditions. Fire is extremely dangerous. Okay, let's look at the idea of habitat next. Habitat is a place where a living thing like a plant or animal finds everything that it needs to live. Think about what you need to live. Can you list some ideas in the chat? I'm talking about the basics of survival here, not the stuff that you maybe think you can live without, like your games and hobbies. I'm talking about the things that every living thing on Earth needs. What things are essential to life? And habitat, food, water, shelter, yes. Medicine, And some plants are medicinal. Yeah, great. Okay, so when we were talking about habitat, the basic needs for living things are water, food, shelter, and space. How much and what type of each of these depends on what type of organism it is. Does it need a little bit of water, like a cactus, or a lot of water, like a fish? Does an animal eat only plants or other animals, or some of both? Shelter could be a den for a bear or a nest for a bird, and every living thing needs its own space. For example, elk, like these ones that live in Banff National Park, they need wide open spaces with grasses and shrubs to eat. They need to find streams and ponds with clean water to drink. For shelter, they gather in large herds to keep watch for predators. And predators, like wolves, hunt for elk and deer to eat. They also need clean ponds and streams to drink from. Wolves shelter in dens to raise their babies, and once the pups are big enough, they roam with the pack. Wolves need a lot of space in their habitat. They are wary of people and tend to avoid places with too much human activity. The dramatic landscape of the Canadian Rocky Mountains provides a wide variety of habitats, and they're not all equally easy to live in. Biologists divide these areas into ecoregions, depending on how high up on the mountain slopes they are. So here's an outline of Banff National Park. The alpine ecoregion, shown here in pink and gray, makes just over 40% of the area in the park. The tops of the mountains are the hardest places for plants and animals to live because it's windy, cold, and steep, and mostly made up of rock and ice. Now, the subalpine ecoregion, shown here in orange and yellow, is full of steep mountainsides, mostly covered in forest, so it's not the easiest place to live either. The subalpine ecoregion makes up about 55%, or just over half of the park. And that leaves us with the 3% of the park, shown here in green, that is the montane ecoregion. The montane ecoregion is found in the low elevation valley bottoms where there's plenty of water, shelter, and food. In other words, for many types of plants and animals, the montane ecoregion contains the best habitat in Banff National Park. It's also the easiest place for wildlife to travel through. Speaking of travel, it's time to introduce our third important concept of the day, wildlife corridors. So a wildlife corridor, it's a place that animals use to move from one part of their habitat to another. They're areas that are easy for animals to travel through. In order to work well, though, they need to have certain qualities. Think about the things that make you comfortable or uncomfortable when you walk around your neighborhood. Would you go down a dark, narrow alley at night? Or what about in the daytime? Would you feel comfortable in a crowded place with a lot of strangers, noise, and activity? How would you feel in a place with a few other people that you know well? Or would it feel nicer where you have a big personal space away from anyone else? Maybe having nobody around at all, or maybe that would feel scary or lonely to you. Everyone might have different answers depending on what makes them feel most comfortable. Personal space is a big concern for wildlife, and they will avoid areas where they feel too crowded. To work well, wildlife corridors have to be away from human activity. Otherwise, the wary animals like wolves, they won't go there. So corridors need to prove that we have cover, provide plenty of space to hide, like trees and tall grass, so that animals can feel safe. And the corridors need to have enough space for different kinds of wildlife so that they can all use it at the same time as well. In Banff National Park, at the foot of Cascade Mountain, there's an important wildlife corridor right next to the busy Trans-Canada Highway. Just like the highway is a way for humans to travel, the Cascade Corridor is a travel route for wildlife. It helps them to avoid areas with a lot of human use, like our town site, railway, and roads. So let's check out this situation from a different perspective.
Hi everybody, we are on the top of Sulphur Mountain to get a bird's eye view of our wildlife corridors. So when we look at the Bow Valley, you'd see a lot of room here, right? Well, let's take another closer look at that. So one thing that's in the Bow Valley is our town of Banff, and that takes up most of the room at the foot of Tunnel Mountain. Then we also have our Trans-Canada Highway and the Canadian Pacific Railway that run parallel through the whole national park. And those are two major transportation corridors. Then if we look further up on the mountainside, like on Cascade Mountain, you can see how steep that mountain is. And that's just as difficult for animals to climb and get around as it is for us. And we look on the other side of the valley here, we have Mount Rundle. And at the foot of Mount Rundle, it has been built out with the Banff Springs Golf Course. So there's actually a lot of stuff happening in that precious tiny slice of the park that we call the montane ecoregion, because that's only about 3% of Banff National Park.
Okay, so that was my colleague Lori up on Sulphur Mountain. Yeah, you see it's a very busy valley bottom with a lot of activity in it. And all the buildings, towns, cars, trains, hiking and biking trails, these are all things that scare wild animals away. They need a way to get through the valley without running into people or our stuff. And that's why it's so important to make these wildlife corridors work as well as they can, which brings us to the Cascade Corridor Fire Project. It puts together all of those ideas about fire, habitat, and wildlife corridors into a project that will help wildlife in Banff National Park. The Cascade Corridor sits at the foot of Cascade Mountain, just north of the town of Banff, in the precious 3% of the park that's the montane ecoregion. Parks Canada lit a prescribed fire here in the spring of 2022 to reduce the risk of wildfire to the town of Banff and to improve habitat in the wildlife corridor. This photo was taken only 5 months after the burn. Wait, it doesn't really look like it's burned, does it? I mean, there are plenty of grasses and trees, all looking nice and green. But if you look closely, you can still find a few charred patches of trees. The fire was not intended to remove the whole forest or only clear away old grass and underbrush and make some open patches in the woods. Do you want to see what the fire was like? Yeah, let's check out some video clips from the spring of 2022. So, these little ping pong balls are what are called aerial ignition devices. They contain a dry chemical that will react with a liquid chemical that's injected into them as they are dropped out of the helicopter. After a few moments, the chemicals mix and create sparks that can light the dry grass on fire. A helicopter can drop thousands of these fireballs in an hour. So the prescribed burn took place right next to the highway, so it was important to light it on a day when smoke would blow away from the road. The fire crew also took care to light a little patch at a time near the highway to control the spread of the flames. Now, sometimes the fires are lit by hand with a drip torch. This can it's a can full of fuel with a wick that lights the fuel as it drops onto the grass. It's a good way to light carefully controlled patches and to remove fuel and create a fire break. Okay. So the experts who light these fires can seem pretty comfortable around the blaze, but they're always paying careful attention to the fire's behavior. Safety is always the #1 priority in a prescribed fire. Here's a view from a helicopter of the fire in progress last spring. You can see lots of little patches of the fire in the grass. When the fire only passes by quickly above the ground, then the grasses and the shrubs can regrow from their roots. All right, now check out this incredible time lapse. So as soon as the fire was out, fresh grass started to grow again thicker and greener than before. Grass provides food for elk and deer. Elk and deer, in turn, are food for the wolves. The more food, the better the habitat. Forest fires often leave many dead trees standing, which provide shelter and food for bugs, birds, and squirrels. And the wide open meadow provides space for elk to shelter together in a herd like this, while still providing enough cover for wary animals like wolves. This one has a bit of dinner in his mouth. So removing the built-up fuels in this area with small contained prescribed fire makes the area more resistant to a big destructive wildfire. This is especially important to protect the town of Banff, the Trans-Canada Highway, and the Canadian Pacific Railway in the Bow Valley. We've seen the devastating effects on wildfire in communities like Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, as well as some of the places people mentioned in the chat. So it's essential to do this work before disaster strikes. Now, the best way to stop a fire is to reduce or remove the fuel that it needs to burn. This is a photo of Parks Canada, of a Parks Canada fire crew burning some of the grasses and shrubs near the fence by the Trans-Canada Highway. They can burn in little patches at a time so that the fire stays in control. That protects the fence and also the people working on the fire. The crew also controls the fire by using water and tools to put out any hot spots that might flare up again. Once an area has been burned, it contains less fuel and is less likely to catch fire again for many years. By burning carefully next to communities, we can reduce the risk of forest fires making their way into towns. And in Banff National Park, that wildfire protection also happens to make better habitat in our wildlife corridors. It also restores an ancient relationship between these forests and fire that was started by Indigenous peoples. With every fire we light, we learn something new to apply to the next one. So let's look at our fire video again. Are there any new words that come to mind when you see fire now? Go ahead and type those into the chat. Has anything changed in your perspective? Or have you seen something new today? Oh, helpful. Shelter, new life, control, bark. This is actually a Douglas fir tree, you see. It has extra thick bark that can resist small to medium-sized fires, so they can keep growing even if their needles get burnt. Natural life cycles, more food. Wow, those are great. Well, thanks very much, everyone. And I hope you can visit Banff National Park soon, or another park across the country in person someday, and even see one of our conservation projects in action. Great.
Fantastic. Steve, that was so much fun. And we've never had such a great chat where it's highlighting the change in people's perspectives in one program ever. So way to go. Classes from all over the country. You guys are so on the ball today. I love your engagement in the chat. And we're going to keep that engagement going with a little Kahoot together to see how much you understood. Now, you don't win anything from this Kahoot, but you do win Steve and I's everlasting respect. And I think that's worth quite a bit. So we're going to dive in with this. We're going to have a couple minutes together. The game pin's up on the screen. So 561-2776. If you've never done a Kahoot before, the faster you answer, the more points you get. So be quick on those trigger fingers today online. YouTubers especially, this is a little delayed for you, so try and make sure you get your answer in as soon as you see the question if you know it. We're going to get underway with that momentarily, and then when we're done, I'm going to head to Mr. Grant's class for our first question. We've got a bunch of great classes with us, so don't worry, I'm coming to absolutely all of you. Let's get underway. And Steve, if you want to help us out with little hints in the final few seconds of each question, you are welcome to chime in and give us a little edge. Here we go.
Okay.
I mean, you know the answer, so be subtle. Question 1, here we go. What does habitat mean? We've been talking about this throughout the entire broadcast today. Is it a wildlife corridor? Is it a place where animals can find all the things they need to live, perhaps? Or is it your house? My house feels like a habitat sometimes because I don't clean it as much as I should, but I think there's a better answer here. 23 of you have already got it in. Let's see. I think most of you are going to get this one right. Yes, a place where animals can find all the things they need to live is their habitat. We might get back to that other answer, though, sometime throughout this Kahoot. Power leopard takes our lead going into question 2. In Banff National Park, forest fires are, I hope you know this, we just did this in the chat together. Is it always good, always bad, or needed at times to regenerate the forest? This is our pervasive theme, and I'm so glad, by the way, that so many kids knew not just about fires happening in Canada, but in the United States, Australia. This is a global issue, and some of the solutions that Banff's trying out work very, very well in a global context. And so 90% of you got this. Needed at times to regenerate the forest. Steve, you did such a good job explaining it that they're just like, these are easy questions for our audience today.
Yeah.
Power leopard keeps our lead going into question 3, and then we're diving in with our Q&A. What is a tunnel under the highway for animals called? And I will note there's a right answer here, but then there's an answer that should be the right answer and is absolutely what they should call it. That's my opinion. But we've got a traverse tube, a sneak through, a fauna funnel, or a wildlife underpass. All right, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's our answer? Then we'll check our podium together. Mr. Grant, we're coming to Toronto first. A wildlife underpass is the correct answer. However, the one student who picked fauna funnel, I'm with you because that's absolutely what they should call them. That's like genius marketing. Fauna funnel forever is my philosophy.
Fauna means animals.
It does. It's a perfect name. It's alliterative. It's cute. Yeah. I'm all for it. Power leopard got swept at the end. What happened? Who took the lead? By 13 points. Dazzle Rooster wins the game. If you guys want to let us know who you are in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to stop sharing there, and we are going to head to our classes. So live groups, I'm coming to you. YouTubers, get ready in the chat to share questions as well. But Mr. Grant's class, kicking off with you guys. 5-6s. Welcome in at St. Luigi. Hi. Hey. Do you have a question for us? Thinking about it.
Okay, so can you hear me? No?
Yeah, perfectly, man.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. All right, guys. Do you have a question? Anyone have a question they want to ask? No? We had Simone? Yeah? We had mentioned they heard Great Slave Lake mentioned earlier, and they weren't sure what that was or what had happened there in terms of wildfire.
Perfect. If you could explain that to us, Steve. Great Slave Lake, what's going on?
Yeah, it's in northern Alberta, not the far north, but it's in just north of the center of Alberta. And a few years ago, they had a devastating wildfire. And so this is an area that has public lands and some indigenous lands. There's no national park really nearby, so wouldn't perhaps have had a prescribed fire program. So unfortunately, that is a good example of how we learn things slowly, is when a community gets hit and then they see, you know what, we need to manage not only our lands, but also our personal infrastructure. And so they begin to put in these programs that are often called things like fire smart or fire adaptations. And then they can protect their houses by putting certain kinds of plants around them or clearing them in certain ways, using different building materials. And so Slave Lake years ago helped us to make some improvements on that end. So a bit of an unfortunate story, but it helps us move forward.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Ms. Boz's class, we're going to head to Surrey, BC. I think we've had every class in Surrey, BC over the course of this year join us for a broadcast. So it's always so nice to have you guys. Come on in. Hey.
Hi.
Hey. Do you have a question for us, for Steve?
Yeah, go ahead, Garrett.
In a natural fire, is there a team that helps animals get out of the fire?
Good question. Steve, did you catch that?
Yeah, is there a team that helps animals get out of the fire? Yeah, you know what? just like when things happen that are natural, like heavy weather or more predators or more herbivores, these flux of different things that help the cycles of plants and animals happen naturally, we don't get involved. So what we do is we try and take care of controlling the fire. So if it's a fire that is lit, that is really small and might be all right for the area in the future, we might just watch and let it burn out and let the animals adapt to that naturally. If it's a devastating wildfire, then we fight it as hard as possible and try to build fire breaks and such so that it doesn't spread to more habitats. But in terms of the animals, actually, they know what to do and they see the signs ahead of time. They smell the smoke and they feel the heat, and they can usually move out of the way or sometimes even stay underground.
Yeah. We've actually had variations in this question for years, and I'm really glad you answered it this way, because animals universally, whether it's an earthquake, a tornado, or hurricane, fire, I mean, if anything, in you trying to rescue them, you're putting yourself in more harm's way, and the animal's probably going to get away. It's like a classic piece of advice. If a dog ever goes into the water, for instance, the dog will make its way out. You probably won't. So I'm glad we got this in a fire context too. I love the concern in animal welfare. So thanks, Ms. Boss's class. We're going to head to our Lawson crew. If you guys want to unmute your mic, come on in and take us away. We'd love to have a question from you guys. High five, sixes. Hey.
Say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome in at Argonautes.
No. Let's go 9 plus 2. You have a question for them? Well, what about what we're experiencing right now? That's it. Come on over.
Hey, man.
You go.
What would happen if a prescribed wildfire got out of control?
Yes, great question.
Well, then it's no longer a controlled burn, it's an out of control burn, and those come and go all the time. Sometimes, well, usually it's when either there's been a mistake, someone has thrown a cigarette out or left a campfire going that we didn't keep track of. Sometimes it's lightning strikes. So those happen. And another way that an out of control burn can happen is by a controlled burning getting out of control. So first, to say that the fire crews do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. They really control the conditions and watch. So anytime you see a controlled burn happen, probably there were several that didn't happen because they planned them, but the conditions weren't perfect. But to your question about what happens if they get out of control, well, then they go into the protocol, so the system, the order of events about how to fight it. And it'll depend on how many crews are nearby, and they will bring those crews to fight it with water buckets and creating fire breaks, or sometimes burning a small area so that if the fire comes to that area, it's already been burnt, it won't spread past it. And then if it's still out of control, they start to bring in crews from other places. And so nationally and even all of North America, fire crews can be flexible and help where the situation is most extreme.
I was in a plane to Churchill, Manitoba once. We had fire crews coming from as far away as Europe to come help a fire that was happening in Manitoba at the time. That was back in 2021, I think. So I'm really glad we got that answer. Thanks, Steve. Miss Mustard's class, I'm heading to Brampton. We got a couple of questions coming in on YouTube. Keep those coming, and we'll do a whole other round with our classes after that. But welcome back in, Miss Mustard class. Hi, guys.
Hi, we're a small crew today because there's a soccer tournament happening.
Would the temperature affect the uncontrolled fire, just in case if it's like a hot sunny day?
Yeah, great question.
Can I hear that one again?
Yeah, it's does temperature affect these burns? So whether it's controlled, I think is the context that we're going for. If it's a hot sunny day, does that impact how you have to go about doing the controlled fire? Is that it, Miss Mustard?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, temperature and humidity is such a big factor. And in fact, the prescribed burn program in Banff National Park is basically on hold during the summer because there's always the chance that it can get hot. And if the temperatures are up anywhere near what's comfortable for us to be, outside on a nice summer hot day, then they wouldn't even try it. It's on more moist days that they try them, and early in the spring when the grass is more fresh, and so that also adds moisture on the ground cover, that they usually try these burns.
Great questions, guys. All right, we're going to go to Miss Williams' class on YouTube, and then I'm going to go back to Mr. Grant, who got the mic working miraculously, so way to go with that. Miss Williams wanted to know, if you do have to evacuate people, if there's a fire that gets out of control, if there's a wildfire in the park, how do you help people in that scenario? Do you know this offhand? I know this is a bit of a niche question, but how do we support people if there's a fire that gets out of control, if people need to evacuate?
Yeah, there is an evacuation system where they assess how hot the fire is, how much is burning, and what direction it's going, and then they start to make evacuation orders for those areas and start moving people through. And I personally don't know the latest, the most up-to-date communication systems, but in terms of getting to people's cell phones and different communication networks, they will use whatever is available to them to get a hold of people as fast as possible and to get them out. And in some areas like Banff, they try and advertise these evacuation protocols before, so people can watch for themselves and see if they are going to be asked to leave or asked to change something if a big fire is coming their way.
Yep. Great questions, Miss Williams. Mr. Grant's class, if you guys want to unmute again, I'll come back to you. Miss Boss, Lawson, Mustard, we're coming back to everyone. A couple more questions on YouTube. This is the fun with Banff, is that you guys are like so on the ball that we can add more longer Q&As than ever, which is fantastic. Toronto, come on back in. Hey.
Hi there. Yeah. Okay. So we had a two-part question, which is, how did the idea for the controlled burns develop? Did you get it from somewhere else? And what's inside those little? I know they mentioned there's a chemical, but what was inside those little balls that they dropped from the helicopter?
I love this question.
Okay, I'll start with the second one. It's called an aerial ignition device, and they do look like ping pong balls or fishing floats. And that's just the right size to hold one type of chemical called potassium permanganate. And then it is injected with glycol, which is like antifreeze. And the machine has a little needle with a glycol reservoir. And as one of those ping pong balls falls down into the little holder slot before it's dropped, it gets poked by the glycol, and that sets off the chemical reaction as it's falling to the ground. And it takes about 10-20 seconds for it to ignite, and that's about the same time for it just to get landed on the ground, and boom, that's when the sparks come. And some of them will light because of where it lands, and some of them won't because it wasn't the right fuel there, but that can control the line of burn to get it started. So the other question, what was the other question?
The other question was, where did this idea come from? Is this like a Banff invention, or did you steal it from someone else?
I thought of it. I made it up, and I didn't. It was a long time ago. It was brewing, but then it wasn't until the 1980s that enough information came together about how old the forests were and how unhealthy that is, how dangerous that is because of the dead wood and fuel buildup, as well as the age of the trees that are standing, that being a fuel risk, as well as starting to learn from indigenous knowledge and talking to elders saying, well, they remember, or their grandparents or great-grandparents told them about how it was a tool to keep different kinds of areas, right? And so if you think of it, since the end of the glaciers, when there was almost no vegetation as the glaciers were retreating, so about 10 or 12,000 years ago, there has been people on the land also living and hunting and adding fire. So the landscape we know now is a product of all of this. And it was around the 1980s, so pretty recently, that they put all of that into the package and tried to come up with this prescribed burn program.
Very, very cool. You actually touched upon two things that I want to harp on for just a quick second for our kids. One is the glacier thing. The fact that in North America, we were under like a kilometer or more of ice and like not that far back in the past is astonishing. And two, when you're a scientist, you get to have roles where you're sitting on the edge of a helicopter dropping flame ping pong balls in a national park. And if there's a cooler job than that on planet Earth, I'm really not sure what it is. So I'm really glad we've got this level of enthusiasm. Miss Boss's class, Surrey, we're going to head to you guys, Lost and Miss Mustard, to wrap up after that. Come on back in Surrey. Hey, guys.
All
Hi
right.
again.
Mila has a question.
Ela?
Why is the environment so important for us?
She's wondering
Why-
what important things the firefighters do to help the fires.
Nice.
Yeah, some of the things the firefighters do is, well, first thing they do is they make decisions. They decide whether they should just let the fire burn or whether it's time to bring in some intervention or some ways to try to stop or control the fire. And some of those things you might remember we saw in the slideshow. We saw spraying water on areas, but in terms of water, another thing they can do is bucketing from a helicopter or an airplane to bring water from a lake or a river and splash it on certain areas of the fire. They also do different kinds of what are called fire breaks. So that means if a fire is coming in one direction, there's an area that has been cleared, so there's no more fuel there, so that it won't jump to another area. Roads can be natural fire breaks, but they also pre-burn areas, sometimes strips, sometimes larger areas, and sometimes they also bring in bulldozers and diggers to actually like dig up the grass and the shrubs and the trees so that makes just a dirt area that the fire won't jump across. And yeah, they support each other in all these different ways.
Very, very cool. Thanks, Ms. Boss's class. 2 more questions to wrap up. I will note again, if you want to check out our final session, I know some of our classes have to go pretty soon. Peak Discovery, we've got our one final program coming next week. If you want to check that out, and this program and everything else we do are on our YouTube channel. If you want to follow up and catch any answers you might have missed. Ms. Lawson's class, come on back in and take us away. Welcome to Alberta.
Okay, Duncan.
How many people are in one fire crew?
Yes, great question.
I guess it depends. It depends on how big the area is that they're managing. So it could be a small fire crew, like maybe an area that's just near a population that is small, and then there's a big area spread out. Might just be a few people. It could be dozens of people. Here in Banff, I'm just looking at my colleague. Do we know how many people are in the Banff fire crew? Yeah, it's not hundreds.
Yeah.
Maybe dozen or more. Yeah.
Super cool. It's like a commando unit of awesome people going in to help maintain the park. I love it. Great question, guys. Miss Mustard's class, we're going back to Brampton, another town that we've had like every class on over the course of the year. Welcome in, and way to go for skipping soccer, you guys. This is more fun. Perfect.
How many endangered species are in Banff National Park?
Hey, great question.
How many endangered species of animals, plants, fish, insects?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
No pressure.
Good question. So I would say of critically endangered species, there's not too many. One that is called the Banff Springs snail, which is a little snail that lives up on Sulphur Mountain, and there's only a local population. So they watch those very closely. But then there's lots more animals and plants that are threatened. Like it depends, the grizzly bear is kind of going back and forth between feeling like they're threatened or healthy. It depends on how we're assessing it. Yeah. And the thing is, in national park, the idea is to have this full family of plants and animals that have enough space that they can not be threatened by any small event like a smaller fire or a little bit more development, in certain areas, that there's big enough wild areas that they can keep repopulating and stay healthy and stay living far enough away from people that they're actually not endangered. So happily, the animals in Banff National Park are all there, including the bison, and very few are endangered.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the snail, though, because you have this really special... What's the spot called with the snails? There's like I can't for the life of me remember it offhand, but it's this wonderful little place you can go and see them all in the little, like...
It's called the Cave and Basin National Historic Site.
Thank you. Is this part of Banff, or is it like a subset, or is it like a whole different thing that happens to be like right in the area? What's the deal?
It is the actual pinpoint origin of the national park system, because Banff was the first one. And so right at this location, which is now just on one corner of the town of Banff. So you go through the town of Banff, cross the bridge, turn right, you'll end up at the historic site which has a cave that was first found where there's hot springs. And then you have another area, which is the basin, where you can actually see some snails.
Cool. That was my first visit when I came there, because I'm incredibly nerdy. So my first thought was like, cool, snails when I came to Banff. I was like, ignore the mountains for a minute and just head to there. Steve, this has been so much fun. I know we could talk all day and talk about all the amazing things with wildlife corridors, fire, everything you shared today. I will encourage our classes, check out the Peak Discovery webpage, check out Banff's National Park page. They've done so much work in creating some really incredible educational resources over the last few years. It's been such a thrill having them for a bevy of broadcasts this year. And so to Steve, to Lori in the background too. What we do to wrap up every back program, I'm going to bring in our classes to say a big thank you and farewell. If you're at home, you want to scream and yell too, that's great. But Miss Boss, Miss Laws, and Miss Mustard's class, thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.